At AV&R, our mission is to humanize robotics. We decided to create this podcast series to help you demystify the world of robotics and discover what some of the brightest minds in the field are doing. Welcome to Robotics for All Podcasts by AV&R.
Bern Grush is the Executive Director of the Urban Robotics Foundation and Chief Innovation Officer at Harmonize Mobility. In the evolving world of ground transportation and its digitalization, he brings a unique urban sensitivity to vehicle automation from a human social perspective and a complex systems perspective. In this conversation, we unpack Toronto City Council's December 17th decision to ban robotics on their streets and sidewalks, stopping a Canadian robot startup in its tracks. Bern's current work is critical to move this industry forward, as he's been drafting a technical standard for ground-based automated mobility, specifically looking at loading and unloading at the curbside and on sidewalks. It's fascinating to hear Bern's perspective on this event. Hope everyone enjoys the show. Here we go. Hello, Bern. How are you today?
Hi, Michael. I'm actually quite well. It's a wonderful day.
Yes. Well, by this point, we've already done a little introduction as to who you are, but I'd love to hear about the Urban Robotics Foundation and how long you've been in operation and what is the goal of your foundation?
So I'm going to work backwards. The Urban Robotics Foundation, the actual not-for-profit foundation, was founded only in October of this year. The work that is based on, which is the Urban Robotics Standards with the ISO, the International Organization for Standards, started in October of 2019. I want to take us back one step further, is that I've been with ISO standards since 2006, and I've been with standards since the middle 1980s. So I'm a long-time standards person, taking us right up till now. The expression of that work in the Urban Robotics Foundation is entirely based on concern for the industry and for the municipalities and for planning, all those three elements that would be preparing robots of various kinds for operation in the public sphere. This is different from factory robotics. It's different from warehouse robotics. It's different from hospital robotics and so on. These are mobile in the public sphere. And I underscore that matter because when you have robots in a workplace, people are trained and paid to work with those robots and so on. When you have robots in the public space, on the street, on the sidewalk, all the people there around are not involved with that, whatever that activity is. If that robot is delivering, plowing snow, cleaning the sidewalk, writing parking tickets, all those pedestrians and other drivers are not related to it. That's a very, very big difference between all the robotics work that we've done to date. And that's what the purpose of the standard is, and that's why the purpose of the foundation is.
That's an interesting distinction because, preparing for the podcast here, I looked at some of the history of different robotics regulations, and I got involved in the robotics industry in 2000. And when I started working in the industry, we were already really good at the regulations. So it was international. Many jurisdictions followed international guidelines and recognized them. So it was pretty comfortable to think about regulation, and you had a lot of defined parameters. But in all those cases, you're right. It was, whether it's in a factory or whatever the setting was, everyone was paid to be there, and it was part of the function, their job, to work alongside these.
That is a huge difference. So, I mean, one thing is to just imagine, you're just walking along the sidewalk as an able-bodied person. That's one thing. What if you're walking your dog? It's a little bit different. What if you're with a child and pushing a child in a cart and another child's on your hand and you're walking? It starts to get complicated. And what if you're blind? And what if you're in a wheelchair? So it's not just that you're not involved. It's also that you might have challenges with what you're carrying, what you're doing, your personal circumstances and so forth. And this is all making it a very complex environment. That's again, I underscore that because that has been underestimated by the industry itself, in my opinion.
Yeah, yeah. And when I look on your website, and it's the ISO 448 is the call out, the name of the standard that you're drafting. And you talk specifically about, of course, there's the ground based. So we're not talking drones. We're talking robots that run along, are mobile, but that run on the ground. And you talk about specifically curbside and footway. So maybe talk a little bit about those parameters. You're focused on sidewalks and.
Curbside is robotic taxis, robotic vans. So if you, passenger vehicles, shuttles, and taxis that don't have a driver, those are robotic devices. And you could have a goods movement vehicle that might not have a passenger. It's a larger van carrying, like a step van sized vehicle. It could be a smaller vehicle, as in the ones that may carry multiple grocery orders, and there's even ones now that they operate as a small shop. I mean, the idea is that they could come into a neighborhood and you can access them and make purchases from their contents and so forth. So all kinds of robots are being designed. Now, when I say curbside, it's in the road. It's in the roadway where you would park or where you would drive, or on the shoulder. On the footway side is actually what we normally would call sidewalk or pavement in Europe. I sometimes use the word pathway or footway. These are pedestrian places, whether they're a trail. It could be, for example, it could be that a robot is moving an order of groceries from a store through a parking lot. Well, that parking lot is humans walk in that parking lot. So the cars, so you now have a mixed environment. I still refer to those as footways because you are walking through the parking lot to get to your vehicle and so forth. So all of those kinds of, what I'm underscoring is public spaces, public domain, where you have the concern of public safety and non-involved pedestrians.
Now, in your work, are you focused locally, or is this an international effort that your foundation is looking at?
It's absolutely international. Well, the foundation is the Canadian foundation. When you incorporate something, you incorporate under the tax laws of some country or another. I live in Canada, so it is a Canadian not-for-profit. However, membership is international. Our board is Canadian, but our membership is international. Already from England and Portugal and Hungary and 4 or 5 cities in the United States and about 4 in Canada are involved. So it absolutely is international. Part of the reason to be international is because the technology is international, and what you want to do is you want to have really competent technology that you have the best to choose from, and not to have that technology different by every manufacturer and from every country, so that you can't take advantage of the best technology that's available. So that you want those standards for that purpose.
Right. Yeah, we've been looking at what's been going on in the robotic industry, and we've been working in the industrial space for many years, and traditionally it was all the robotic arms, right? And then I would say over the past 5 years, we've seen the number of applications really accelerate. So there was the collaborative robots. So there was all of a sudden people working side by side. And then, this whole advent of, self-driving cars and mobile robots, the applications have just exploded. So we got interested in seeing what was going on because of that. And, you're right, it is an international technology. On LinkedIn, I see a lot of offerings, for example, out of China. There's many robotics companies and startups that have begun there and now are calling upon us, looking to bring their technology over here. So it's definitely an international question. Now, before we get into, what happened with the Toronto City Council and the City of Toronto and their approach to robotics, I'd like to take a minute here and run through with you some of the history of this robot regulation. I found it, um, we've got almost 40 years of work in regulation. And as I did my background research, there's a pattern that it's been recognized that there's more and more applications coming out with this. So when I looked at the ISO website, they talked about the first industrial robot being put into production in the 1970s. Then they say they started a committee in 1983 focused around robotics for manufacturing environment. So, and that was part of it was a subcommittee, part of industrial automation. Then by 2006, they updated to robots and robotic devices. So at that point in 2006, they recognized that it's not only industrial robots, but they were getting into something called service robots. And the way they define service robots is it's a robot that performs useful tasks for humans or equipment excluding industrial automated applications. So that starts to branch into what you're talking about, where maybe you're getting into the general public. But I think, I like your point there where, if it's in a hospital or let's say in a warehouse, it's maybe not completely industrial, but everyone's paid to be there, right? Then in 2016, they generalized even more, and it's called the Robotics Working Group. So over the years, we've seen a broadening of standards, and they've even included, and this isn't something we see much here, but out of Asia, there's a lot of press around this out of Japan. They talk about personal care robots. So this is robots that are there to help the elderly, people with disabilities, exoskeletons, things like that. So, I think a lot of the innovators in this space were building robots to help people, not necessarily the science fiction where we're building robots to take over the world and have negative impact. We're really talking about a group of innovators, a group of engineers and scientists that are here trying to build solutions to help people. So when you look at the personal care robots, they break it down into three categories: mobile servant robot, a physical assistant robot, and a person carrier robot. But that standard, they make a distinction. They move less than 20 kilometers an hour. Now, so the standard you're drafting it's to build on this and bring it out into spaces where now these robots are working in the general population and still helping people, mandate to help people, but maybe they're on a sidewalk or they're on a roadway loading and unloading.
So it's going to depend. So a sidewalk robot may help people in the sense there's a class of robots called follow me robots.
Okay.
And a personal follow me robot, it's essentially a piece of luggage. It's a suitcase that follows you. I mean, you will have a device on your person or in your pocket, and basically it's just following you. It's basically on an electronic tether, and it would follow maybe a meter or two behind you. And what it has in it is it might have your groceries or your whatever it is you're carrying. So it's basically a small servant to carry things for you. It would be superb for you've seen, especially older people when they go shopping, walking, they're dragging a sort of a two-wheeled cart behind them full of their groceries. Well, that's exactly what this kind of follow me robot would do. So it's personal. Well, then, so that's, the same size robot could be dispatched by a dispatcher. And you'll see that with companies like Starship and KiwiBot and Amazon. They'll have it's the same sort of size. It's kind of like the size of a cooler. It's on 4, 3, or 5, or it's either on 3, 4, or 6 wheels.
Okay.
That's usually the various configurations. And there's many configurations of those, but those are all for taking an object from one point to another. So it can be for express delivery, food delivery, grocery delivery, and so on. That's a service robot that's actually working for a logistics company. they call them personal delivery because it's a delivery personally to you. It's delivering a meal to you. The entire reason for that journey, the same thing as if you ordered something and somebody on a bicycle or car brought that to you. You could order pizza and a car would bring it to you. That's a personal delivery to you. So when they use the expression personal delivery robots, it's still working for a logistics company or a sandwich shop, or it's not yours. It's delivering to you.
Right. And is that where Tiny Mile would fit into are they part of that group of robots?
Tiny Mile had a beer cooler sized, radio controlled, remotely controlled robot. I want to be careful because I don't know if it was fully remotely controlled or partially, because I will tell you there are devices that are largely automated. I don't want to use the word autonomous because there is a human teleoperating. So the teleoperator, this is important, the teleoperator might be constantly teleoperating. It might be on a joystick making every decision. It might be that the teleoperator only takes over when there's trouble. So the vehicle does fine on its own, and it comes, for example, it comes to an intersection at which it's not quite sure what to do. And in that case, the teleoperator actually takes over and tells the vehicle what to do. So whether the machine is 100% teleoperated or 5% teleoperated, that doesn't matter to the standard. It might matter to the operator. Why? Because if an operator can have a machine that's only 5% teleoperated, they could have one person watch 3 or 4 machines. Really, it's
right.
That's where the labor saving and profit aspect comes in. So if you're FedEx and can have 1,000 robots operated by 100 people, that's good. But if you have 1,000 robots operated by 1,000 people, it's unworkable. You can appreciate the control center would be insane.
Yeah.
So, but that's the problem. That's Tiny Mile's problem and FedEx's problem and Amazon's. That's their problem to figure out how highly self-operated these machines can be. I'm not concerned about that. I'm concerned about if you're going to come on the sidewalk, what are your rules of behavior on the sidewalk? Basically what I'm writing, if you know what a Highway Traffic Act is, every province, Ontario is one, has a Highway Traffic Act, all the rules of the road. Well, I'm writing the Sidewalk Traffic Act. How do you behave on the sidewalk? Which side of the sidewalk do you travel on? What do you do? What do you do when you come to a very narrow passage? You have the room. There's enough room in that passage, but there happen to be other pedestrians around. What is your behavior? How much leeway do you leave to the other pedestrians before you enter that narrow passage, for example? That's just one example of many. The city, any city needs to have a whole body of rules that the city is managing. That's important, not the robotics operator. The city has to say what those rules are. And that's what we're doing. The standard is the language for the municipality to say, here is our road rules or sidewalk rules. If you would like to operate in our municipality, please follow these rules. And I don't care whether you're teleoperated or automated, you still have to follow the rules.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's a big important point for safety. And like I mentioned at the beginning, I think something that is very common and people in the robotics world are very used to working with those type of guidelines and standards. And in fact, when you lay that out, it greatly helps knowing what you need to get done in order to make something work, that it benefits everybody.
We're in that just this week, we're writing the first 50 of what will be several hundred rules. Just quickly, what do you do when you approach an intersection? How do you behave crossing an intersection? What do you have to do if you have to turn back? Like if you're partway across the crosswalk and for some reason you have to return. Every pedestrian has sometimes found themselves in the middle of a crosswalk and had to turn around and go back. Maybe it only happens to you once a year, but it does happen. What does a robot do? Not how it decides. That's That's the robot's problem to decide I have to go back. But if you have to turn around and go back, what do you have to do? What signals do you have to give off? What lights do you have to turn on? What sounds do you need to make? Because there's other pedestrians around you.
Right.
How do you tell people I'm turning around going back? And so on. So these are things that might only happen once a year per robot. It's going to happen. And how do they behave? And they have to behave consistently. Otherwise, you as a pedestrian will be confused. We're now in an intersection with cars coming by. It's not a good place for confusion.
Okay. So we mentioned Tiny Robot, and that's a Toronto-based startup. And so we kind of unpacked a little bit the standards. It seems your work, it's pretty new in the sense your organization's been around since October, but it's not started from scratch. You started from previous work done, and you're looking to bring that into Canadian municipality. Now, Tiny Robot, the startup in Toronto, they put some robots on the streets of Toronto, and that forced a conversation with the Toronto City Council as to, okay, are these robots allowed on our streets? So I like to let's continue with your pattern. Let's work backwards. So what was the outcome of Friday's City Council meeting?
So I want to stress to the listeners, I do not have an intimate understanding of Tiny Robot. I have what's online. I have had a couple of messages that's gone back and forth between myself and the CEO. I've never met him, and I don't know the circumstance. I do not know how highly automated his device is. I don't know how many he has. I have a guess. So I'm guessing about the business details. This part, I just want to make sure that listeners know that anything that I say about the business is a guess. What I do know, and this is from listening to the transcription because it's recorded on YouTube, that the city came to a vote on Friday morning and asked 7 councillors. I counted them on the 7 councillors asked about something like 25 questions or comments of a city manager who's responsible for transportation-related innovation in the city, and grilled him with several questions, all of which he answered very well. And the conclusion was that they should suspend. I'm using the word suspend. There's this word ban or not permitted, lots of words. I'm just saying the operation of robots, not just Tiny Mile, by the way, any robot is suspended from operations on cities until such time, and this is new, this was not developed until during this debate, that it went from ban to suspension, and then it gave a date for the suspension, and that is it has to wait until the province, Ontario province, sets out a certain program for pilots. I don't know what that program is. I mean, I know it's a program to test and pilot, but I don't have the document saying what that is because it's not been, well, I don't have that document. And there is not a date that I'm aware of in which the city knows that that pilot is ongoing. So there is a provincial process for which the city has to say, yes, we will or will not engage. I can make a guess that they will, but I don't know that. And after the city says that we engage, then we will engage with that provincial pilot, and then we can operate according to that pilot, whatever that pilot is. I will tell you that other cities have done this. They've said stop. Then they've come back and said, okay, you can trial or pilot this way or that way. So basically, I'm just going to tell you my prediction. My prediction is the province will do something. That's almost certain. They can't do zero. They have to do something. I suppose that Toronto will, however they feel about that, I suppose Toronto will engage in some way with that pilot. Again, I'm guessing. And when they do that, there will be a constrained pilot for some period of time in which certain things will be allowed. And so I cannot predict what that will be. I certainly can't predict whether Tiny Mile would engage or not. It's nothing that I would know about that. All I know is that that company, along with a couple of others, cannot test in a public on the public sphere. They can test only in testing grounds, but they can't test on the sidewalks.
Right, right. And the language is maybe when I looked at the language of the definition of micro utility device, this could even be brought down to some remote controlled vehicles. So it's not a robot because it can be automated or remote controlled, and it transports itself. It uses any kind of power other than muscle power. So you could imagine there's going to be a lot of questions about somebody running their RC car on the street, and maybe are they liable for a $250 fine at that point? But that's maybe getting a little bit in the weeds. But there's maybe there's certainly lots of questions that come out of this decision on Friday.
Yeah. Well, I was on the sidewalk yesterday, and I was passed by a person in a scooter. Like, this happened to be a disabled person. It's not a wheelchair, but it's electric scooter. But it's as though it's acting as a passenger carrying device.
Yeah.
In this case, the person's their disability happened to be obesity, which was the scooter. But nonetheless, it is a device that, in this case, passenger oriented. But it's on the sidewalk. It's electric, and now the difference is there's a human operating. The delivery robots, the human is at some distance. The human is somewhere else in the city. Usually, it's one of the problems is there's so much mythology. It is possible to teleoperate from the other side of the ocean. It's possible that you could hire somebody in India or doesn't matter. You could hire somebody from other countries to operate your. In fact, there was a case where Estonian robots were used, and it was assumed that the operator was sitting in Estonia operating the robots in Washington, D.C. I have no evidence of that. That was because the machines were made in Estonia. I do not know that there was an operator in Estonia. I think that would be a little bit. When you're running a trial or a pilot, why would you do that? But anyway, there is an assumption that they're being operated offshore, that is an unfounded assumption. The same way as one of the counselors thought there might be the possibility of terrorist activity. That counselor is not incorrect in saying that there's a possibility of. There's no evidence of that. It's an exaggerated fear, but it's not ridiculous.
Yeah.
So you start to see the problems is that you can say some things and you can alarm some people with some what if this, what if that, and so on. So you end up exaggerating the negatives, and the negatives have been exaggerated, and you have underplayed the positives. And I think we need to balance that. We need to balance the negatives with regulation, and there are ways to regulate, and to achieve the positives in that regulated environment. So the free-for-all doesn't work, and the ban doesn't work. You have to have a regulated, and we will come to our senses, and we will have a regulated environment.
Yeah, when I listened to the proposal for the ban or the suspension of operations, and it was when I listened to the reasons behind it, certainly, sharing the sidewalk and making sure the sidewalks are accessible to all walks of life, all people. That's definitely an important element. I think some of the reasoning behind it, you can say there was safety concern, but then there was the whole what if. So there was people thinking, okay, well, I don't know how this thing drives. It could be, like you said, offshore. It could be just they didn't understand the technology. And there's a lot of education to be done to understand what are the building blocks that go into these things that allow them to move along the street. And, in many cases, when you start looking at self-driving vehicles, when it's done right, it will be safer in many cases than a person on the road. So there's committees for Vision Zero was a committee that you guys made me aware of during all the communication, where their goal as an organization is to have zero pedestrian fatalities due to traffic accidents within a city, just in general. And they have a whole committee or a whole section on self-driving and why that's important and why that will make our streets safer. And there's a lot of similarities in this technology. So when I heard some of those arguments, it was just a lack of understanding. So there's a whole lot of education, and which is not necessarily easy, because I chipped away and I built a robot from scratch, a mobile robot that I can operate in my house. So it takes there's a few layers to these technologies, and it's not extremely simple by any means. So it takes a bit of effort, and it's going to take a lot of folks like yourself to unpack it and make sure that we put the right elements around it. Now, maybe it'd be good to hear. So we have two stakeholders in this decision. We've got the maybe you can unpack that a little bit. So there's the robot innovators.
More than two stakeholders.
Okay.
Look, you have the city's responsibility to its citizens, to the safety of its streets. And so that's why when I wrote my article yesterday, I said, if I were on that city council, if I were one of those 26 councilors, because there's 25 plus the mayors, 26 councilors, if I were one of those councilors, I would have voted for the suspension, because my job as a councilor has to do with the total shared public space. And I have people that are concerned, and their concerns are not foolish. They may be exaggerated, but they're still not foolish concerns. So the community, there's one of the members of our foundation is with the Canadian National Institute of Blind, and this person is himself blind, and it's interesting the comments that he makes at our meetings about improvements in the standard that look out for blind. The issues of people who are blind are extremely valuable in strengthening the standard. But there's others that just say no. So basically, you have the city council looking after its citizens, and you do have citizens with legitimate, over exaggerated but legitimate concerns. So there's kind of two concerns already: the actual people who are feeling at risk, and the city councilors need to look after these people. Now you have an industry, so that's like a third. You have a third pillar. You have people that are planning as well. You say, well, that's a distant pillar, but it still matters. If you're going to plan, for example, if you're going to be a city planner and you're starting to lay out, because we need to shrink our roads and expand our sidewalks for many reasons. Look what COVID did. COVID said to us, our sidewalks are too small. They are. We in Toronto and many, many, many cities are not up to snuff on the accessibility guidelines. Forget about robots. Our streets are not, many of our sidewalks are not suitable for accessibility. Full stop. So we need to rethink how we create pedestrian spaces, sidewalks, and all that sort of thing. Now we want to add robots on top of that. So planners need to think about these things, because I think you can appreciate if we wanted to redo all the sidewalks in the city, it's a multi-billion-dollar project. So that's not going to happen right away. It's going to take a long time. And so now you have that. So you have at least those four pillars. And I want to add to the city, the province has issues as well. So it's kind of like there's several stakeholders, 5 or 6. And let me tell you about the retailers. Some of the retailers actually want the services that these companies are providing, because it saves them. So they're a stakeholder as well. You might as well throw in the stakeholder called FedEx and UPS and Purelator. They're all working on these robots. So the whole logistics community, and that their reason for the stakeholders is because it's profits,
right?
And that's their business. They're in a profit-making business, and they're going to make more money by delivering more things more cheaply. So that's a profit point. So you've got 6 or 7 stakeholders. It's a mess.
So when you posted that rundown on LinkedIn, and you said that you would have voted the same way, I was, to be honest, I was kind of surprised by that. What?
No, if I were a counselor. I said if I were a counselor.
If you were a counselor, okay.
I'm not a counselor. My vote is a vote for regulation.
Okay. Now, if you were a counselor in understanding the regulation, you've got a unique, a valuable viewpoint on this
Right.
matter, right? So you're come from regulation, but then you throw yourself as a counselor, and you know, in that context, you would have voted to suspend. What would have made that vote different? What needs to happen for you as a counselor, if you were in the counselor's shoes, knowing what you know about where the regulations at and those type of things?
Well,
What elements would you like to see?
the big problem is that the city council comes to a vote and they have the right and the duty to ask a bunch of questions and then make a decision about their vote. And they did that. They asked a bunch of questions. And the sad part about the questions is these were questions that should have been answered in the previous 2 years, not in the previous week. Right. In other words, there should have been, because this particular company with the robots that we're talking about, they've been around for 2.5 years or something like that, delivering for, I don't know how long they've been delivering, whether it's 1.5 years, but they've been delivering for a while. And the fact is, now I'm told this by the CEO, one of the communications with the CEO said to me, and I put the exact quote in my article from that CEO, said, I went to the city and to the province and had several meetings. I don't know, he had 15 or 20 meetings, had a lot of meetings. And they said, well, we're not sure what you should do. Try it and see. And he said he was told that the best thing to do is to get out and try it and make it visible so that now we can see it and then we can know what to do. So I made the comment in my article that essentially he sacrificed his company. He might have sacrificed his company so that we could understand what robots are, which is kind of a shame. Why would we have a process, a technology approval process that says, we don't know, give it a try, and then if somebody gets upset, then we'll shut you down. That's not a good way to. That's not a good way to dabble. I'm going to use the word dabble. It's not a good way to dabble in technology, because basically that's what's happened. Now, I want to be very cautious. The manager who did not have answers, the manager had answers to the counselor's questions, but very often the answers were, we've looked at that in other jurisdictions, but it doesn't apply here, and we're not sure about that answer. So we had competent answers, but the answers weren't satisfactory. And they're not satisfactory because he was not funded and equipped to have those answers. And so what's missing is the process of stewardship, for innovation. Instead of saying to you, give it a try, we'll see, and we'll shut you down if it doesn't work, we need to say, okay, you can operate like this. You have to report to us like that. You have to let us look at what you're doing, and you have to keep us up to date all the time. And if you don't do that, then we know you can't operate. And if you do that, we're going to keep watching, and then we're going to start developing regulations. So what could have happened was a process like that. Let's just say that process was going on for 18 months. Then the staff manager would have had answers, like solid answers to these counselors' questions. And the counselors may have said, well, we still need to suspend, or they may have said, okay, we're going to let this go for 6 more months, but we want to add these 3 or 4 things to your observation list and so forth. So they might have tightened the screws down a bit, but I don't think they would have shut it down. That's why I'm saying, if I were a counselor on that day, given the answers that I heard, I would have had to vote against it.
Yeah.
I would have no other moral choice as a counselor. So our process, in this case, the process was wrong. Not the counselors were not wrong. The manager was not wrong. The company that had the robots was not wrong. All three were operating in a terrible process.
Yeah.
Almost pointless. A process that is sure to shoot down the innovator. That process is guaranteed to take down the innovator with him.
It reminds me of a situation, and this is something I learned from this situation that I carry with me now. Back in 2007, I was living with my wife and my one kid at the time in Windsor, Ontario. And that's when the economy was tough. in Windsor, and we decided, my family's in the Toronto area, her family's in Montreal. And we decided, you know what, this is the time that we have a chance to move close to family. So we ended up in Montreal. That's how in 2007 we both found jobs, and we moved up here. In the process of doing that, the housing market was really soft in Windsor. So we had to carry our house for 1 year. And so it was a stressful time, as you can imagine. Then we finally got an offer in the house, and we were looking to bridge. We had to do some banking to make it all work. Okay. And at the time, and I'm not mentioning any names here, but at the time, the bank person that I was working with, he goes, listen, Mike, you don't need to worry about your mortgage. That's why you have the CMHC, the mortgage home insurance. They're going to take care of it. So why are you stressing about getting your house sold and all? Just let them take care of it. And something just didn't taste right about that. So I kept digging, and he was wrong. You know, like if ever you go in default, it's everything is forgiven and stuff like that. So we got through it properly, but that was a piece of advice by a person in a spot that I didn't feel right about, and I didn't take it. So, you know, judging by the level of investment needed to build these robots and to put them on the street, that's something that, and I know that the gentleman, the CEO, he had many meetings to try and get to the right answer. But just letting it go in that context, for him, that's probably not the right answer. And you got to keep digging. Now, how do you get through all these layers? And I was surprised. So as I did more digging, there is, at least there's websites for, there's one called Innovate Cities, which is an innovation program in the city of Toronto that's defining and laying out what are the cities of the future. And they're looking into 2040, 2050, and what are the key technology stacks that make an innovative city. In not one place is there a mention of robotics. So somehow I think
that's what it's about. That's one of the elements is about privacy. And so that's that. So I've spoken with them. That organization is not. There's almost no overlap between what they're doing and what I'm doing. There's very little overlap with robotics. Robotics are missed. Robotics came up very fast, very suddenly. I know you've been in robotics for a long time. I've been in robotics since 1970. So robotics are old. I mean, you can take it back to Greece if you want to go all the way back to Hero, but robotics have been around for a while. But the actual possibility of robotics operating in a business on the streets, that's new. That's come up since 2018 with Starship.
I totally agree with you. The fact that they got out of their cages is very recent.
Half of the city, exactly. Just not everybody understands what that means to be a caged robot, but you're right. That's exactly what's happened. Probably something approaching. I'm just guessing by what went on at that meeting. I'm guessing that half of the counselors, this is actually new. I mean, they have heard of it, but it's mixed up in their mind with robots taking over the world, and robots that are dangerous, and robots that have faces, and robots that, it's all mixed up in their mind. They don't understand the distinctions of different kinds of robots. And so that's why I'm saying, fundamentally, if I had been a counselor, then I wouldn't know these things that I know. Sure.
But I'm still trying to unpack, get from you a little bit, what would you need to change your vote as a counselor? So is it, the other thing they talked about now was innovation zone.
I would have had to have had a whole different body of answers to those questions. So I would have changed my vote if many of those answers were different, and that those answers could not be different than they were, because those were the answers that manager had, because he was, I don't know if you noticed this, but he said, the only robots we studied were maintenance robots. And the counselor, what's a maintenance robot? He said, winter maintenance. He's talking about snow. So snow plows and winter maintenance and delivery on, Bathurst and Spadina are not the same. It's not the same things.
No.
And first of all, and then he said, and this was really telling. He said, was there a trial? Was there I said, no, we just had a. He said we had a tabletop. I can't remember the expression, like a tabletop trial or something. Basically, they had a meeting. Now, I don't know if they had a meeting in person or a meeting over Zoom, but they had a meeting about these devices. So there was no trial. There was no test. There was no, let's plow these streets for 6 months. And let's plow these streets over this neighborhood. And let's ask the people if they were threatened or ask the people if they appreciated it. That's what hadn't happened.
Right.
And so you need to not only check for safety, you need to ask people. You need to say, do you mind these robots on your street? Do you feel threatened by them? Are you glad that we're plowing your snow? Or do you feel safer that we've salted the sidewalk using these robots, that you can walk without? See, if we do winter maintenance with these robots properly, if we do it properly, we make the sidewalk safer. Yeah. So I know I live in a building that has older retired people in their 80s, a couple of them all walkers. They can't go out in the winter because of the ice on the sidewalk. We could make the city happier for those people. But that requires the city to do the study that I just described, and there's no budget for that because somebody tells the entrepreneur, well, give it a try and we'll see. Would you be willing to build snowplow robots and just go out and try it? You're not going to do that.
No, that's a big investment, and it's.
But you need a customer. So the customer. Yeah. So who's your customer? Well, it's going to have to be the city of Toronto.
Right.
I'm not going to pay you to plow my snow. The city's going to pay you. So there is no process for the regulatory absorption of technology. That's what's missing. There's a process for invention. There's a process for the universities to train students. There's a process to shut you down if we don't like what you're doing, but there's no process to nurture the regulations. Forget the technology. There's no regulatory process to get you from an idea to how you can safely deploy that idea. That's missing.
Well, relating it to that other organization that innovates cities that you said was more towards privacy. But I think these type of technologies, although they're new, they need to be, if we're going to be forward thinking and create a place to innovate, they need to be a priority technology because we can't focus on everything. So maybe that is part of the answer is to look at, okay, what are priorities? Is this a big one? Is this something that is going to be important for the city of Toronto or whatever city you're in, and make it a priority? Because self-driving vehicles, although there's a lot of debate of how close are they to fruition, they're coming and they're an important element and they can help out a lot. So that could be an important thing to recognize that now that they're here, well, we need to set a priority and a budget, just like you said. And there was a little step forward in this where they talked about an innovation zone. And this innovation zone is at the exhibition place, from my understanding, and it lays out a spot for trying some of these technologies. Now, are you familiar with this type of program?
So I don't know enough about it. I have some guesses about it, but the only thing I know is that it happens to be physically located in one spot, and that happens to be somewhere near or at the CNE grounds, and I don't know where down there. But the problem is that, as stated by the people, the roboticists, well, there's no customers there. So yeah. My job isn't testing to see if the wheels go around and see if my radio control doesn't run into a tree. My job is to deliver sandwiches.
Right.
So I can't deliver sandwiches down there. I can steer around. When I heard that, my first, what did the counselors think was going to happen? To test crash tests or rollover tests? What were they going to test at those grounds? Are they going to, I didn't understand what they would do, because I know that the delivery business needs people in houses to receive a delivery. It's not that hard to understand. I mean, Amazon delivers on my street. They don't deliver on the CNE. And so doesn't make it. It's not a place. Now, if I wanted to test how a snowplow, I want to know how much snow can a snowplow move and how fast can a snowplow move and do they tip over and whatever. That'd be great during a snowstorm to put them down to C&E. That would work, but I don't understand delivery robots. That doesn't make sense.
It's almost like you would need to, instead of it being the exhibition place, carve out a few blocks of the city center, or let's say Tiny Mile, where they're currently operating. I'm assuming they're not operating all over the city. There's probably some core places that they're concentrating their efforts on. Carve out those spaces and allow some pilot project within those spaces.
Well, let me tell you what Pittsburgh did. This is more informative. So the city of Pittsburgh woke up one day about a year and change ago, and there was a state law, Pennsylvania state law passed, that there shall be sidewalk robots. They shall be this maximum weight, this size, this speed, this height. And there was a bill, 3 or 4 pages of bill, saying that they are allowed. And one of the passages, besides, they have to be insured, they have to have brakes, they have to have lights. Very, very simple set of criteria, kind of obvious criteria. And the cities cannot say no. That's the state said the cities cannot say no. The cities can intervene with regulations, but they can't say no. And so the city transportation, the city of Pittsburgh, was furious. They said, we were not even asked. We were told by the state that these are going to be permitted. So instead of whining and crying, what they did was they said, we need to have a pilot now, because when FedEx knocks on our door and says we're going to be delivering, we can't say no because the state said you can't say no. So that hasn't happened in Ontario.
Right.
Ontario hasn't set such a rule. So right now, City of Toronto says no. So they're allowed to do that. But what Pittsburgh did was they found an area, like it was one of the retail areas. Pittsburgh is a much smaller city than Toronto, much smaller than Toronto, but it has a handful of neighborhoods, and there's retail in those neighborhoods. So they received a grant from a foundation called the Knight Foundation. And that Knight Foundation provided a grant for that city and 3 other cities. So there's 4 cities. And that grant money paid the city transportation department to hire a company. It's a company like Tiny. It's a different company. It doesn't matter. It's just another company that has several tens of robots to come and deliver from those retailers, just like Tiny Miles, deliver from those retailers to the people in that neighborhood. And it is guided by the city. It is watched by the city. There's a person in the city, in the transportation department, who's watching and reporting and guiding and so on. And that company, a company called KiwiBot, it's the same size. It's the same kind of device, and it is partially radio operated and partially automated, whatever. It's the same thing, different color, and it's simply. But it's operating under the aegis of the city. The city says, here's the rules, go about this. And we're going to learn what's going on, and we're going to decide what regulations to write. And that's been going on now for several months. I don't know how many months.
Okay.
I actually attended a town hall. So the city of Pittsburgh had a town hall in which they invited various people in to say, what do you think? And people with disabilities said, oh, I'm very worried about these. Are you going to protect us from these? Some students came in and said, oh, can't wait for them to come in. So there was people that were against it, and they listened to all of it. It was a 2-hour meeting, all sorts of comments. It's all gathered into the process. Now that is a regulatory positive process. Still looking after the citizens, recognizing that they don't know about this technology, feeling forced. They were forced by the state to do something. If they did nothing, they would have just sat by, and then what their concern was, FedEx would come in and say, well, too bad, we're coming in. Yeah. Then they would have been in serious trouble. It's almost like the cities that found that Uber was operating and they didn't know about it.
Yeah. Well, and that's a similar situation to where we're at now.
Oh my God, there's scooters all over our streets. How did they get here? So we woke up and said, oh my God, I don't, you know what? This guy had 5 or 7 or 12 robots. He had a handful of robots. Yeah. It's not like he had 10,000 scooters.
Yeah. Yeah,
He had a
and I don't know him personally. I've just seen information about his company, but my bet, if I was to place a bet, is that he's not reckless and that their company was, doing the best they can to make sure the last thing you want your robot to do is to hurt somebody.
I
So
think
I'm sure that that was the first priority. And then after that, you got to make everything work, right? So there's a huge challenge here, but my bet is that they weren't reckless.
well,
And
I also know him personally, but everything I've seen, and I've spoken to him once about a year ago when I said, "How did you?" Because I asked him a year ago. I said, "Do you have permission to do this?" He said, "I've asked and asked, and they said give it a try." I said, "Really?" They said, "Give it a try." And that was it. So that was a conversation from a year ago, and the quote that's in my article, I got in writing. I did not speak to him, but I got it in writing 2 days ago when I asked him, "Can
yeah,
you tell me exactly what happened? Because I don't want to go from my memory." And so that quote was literally his quote,
yeah.
and it's consistent with what I remember from a year ago. So I would assert he has not been reckless, and I would assert he has been, I don't know, I have to watch my language, but he's been screwed.
Yeah. Well, I come from robotics, so definitely my sympathies sit with him, and I could just imagine uh, that's a big deal after all the development and all the work and effort to put these robots in the street to have it shut down like that. Um, so, one of my questions here for you is what is a win-win outcome? I'm not. Maybe we're past that because for sure, I'm
Well,
assuming his business impacted.
the win-win outcome is that he's able to survive.
Yeah,
I don't know. I mean, I have no idea. I mean, he says on LinkedIn and Twitter that I have to leave, and I cannot judge that. The win-win is that he survives and he is central to the pilot, whatever that pilot is, just like KiwiBot's central to the pilot in Pittsburgh.
yep,
It's now well known because of this event. So if he can live through this suspension, what doesn't kill him is going to make him stronger. He's going to be better off. But I don't know if he can make it through this, as I have no idea what his staying power is.
right.
And it is unfair. See, one of the things that listeners may or may not know, and you and I don't know, is how much public funding he has had, because there has been until now something called AVIN, is the Autonomous Vehicle Innovation Network, that has been providing funding to various startups for various purposes. I have no idea if he's had funding, but imagine that he has had provincial funding, and that helped him to get to this point, which is a positive. Thank you if that happened. And at the same time, one of the cities in that same province shuts you down. Look at that contradiction between the levels of government. Now, I'm on thin ice here because I do not know if he had funding from the province. None of my business, and I did not ask that.
Yeah.
And it is the case that the levels, the cities in the province, are not always getting along with these things. That is a problem in Ontario. I don't think it's the only place where it's a problem, but it is a problem. And I am concerned that he has received two sets of messages. He received, here's some money, go ahead, and shut down. I think that that's possibly also going on, but I have to walk back that because I don't know that for sure.
Yeah.
You'd have to interview him.
Now, you talked about Pittsburgh being
Yep.
an open environment for robotics through the storyline that you mentioned. In Canada, to your knowledge, is there any other cities that are running pilots of robotics? Is there any precedent for this in Canada?
So there's other roboticists in other cities. In other words, there's other companies starting making robots in other cities. I'm not going to name which cities they are because I don't know. I know there's. I know several of them. I just got a message from Calgary that's saying they didn't say they have robots, but they said, "Oh, we're forward thinking. So we're very interested in this." I didn't write to them about this event in Toronto. I wrote to them about the Urban Robotics Foundation. So there are cities that are aware and that are open and are thinking, but you're asking, are there any cities operating them?
Yeah.
I don't know that.
Okay.
Remember, I'm not an industry advocate. I'm a standards advocate.
Understood.
And part of the standards is for regulation. So I'm a regulations advocate. And so it doesn't matter to me whether it's Calgary or Montreal or Toronto. And it doesn't matter to me whether it's Lisbon or Budapest. What matters is that there's a model, there's a it's called a model code, but there's a model code or a standard that a state or a nation, I mean a state like a federal state, can say, we are going to permit these and we're going to write federal legislation, because some states don't have provinces. Like there's a state of Canada that has provinces and so on, and there's a state of the United States that has states. But there's countries that just haven't had. So in some European countries, the transportation is national. Our transportation in North America is mostly state or province. So most of the transportation rules, those are Highway Traffic Act, is not federal, it's provincial. So who is going to regulate sidewalk robots? Because remember, sidewalk robots go on crosswalks. So the Ontario Highway Traffic Act has to consider these. Either it bans them, it says you cannot go on our crosswalks, or if you can go on our crosswalks, we have to tell you how to behave on those crosswalks. So the Ontario Highway Traffic Act has to consider or ban. And no one's been, well, I'm not aware of anybody making a decision about those things. I know they're thinking about it, but they're not making. So we're very, very early in this.
Yep.
So this fellow with this CEO of Tiny Mile took a tremendous leap. I mean, he's a. You've heard the expression, what is it called? The leader takes all the arrows in his back.
Yep.
I can't remember the expression, but this guy is covered in arrows right now.
Well, he's early. Let's hope he's not too early. And Bern, I have to say, it sounds like your organization this is never more important time for your organization, and it looks like you probably can't work fast enough to try and get everyone involved and make sense out of a path forward.
Oh, I need sponsors. I need FedEx and UPS and Amazon to step up, because who's going to benefit from this is when any of those companies, DHL and all those companies, can go into a city, say we're starting express deliveries. The city says, "Yeah, we understand. Here's the rule book." Right now, they go in there, they say, "What robots? What are you going to do with them? We have no idea. We've never heard of these." And so, how can those big logistics companies operate without a rule book? They can't.
Yeah.
So this is all being held. So the only, I mean, this Tiny Mile took all the arrows, but the ones that need this are the big logistics operators and the cities that will permit or not these logistics operations in their city.
Yeah, and it's a good opportunity for a Canadian company to stand out and make inroads and show how it's done. And I'm rooting for Tiny Mile. I'm rooting for the city council to recognize this and find a safe path forward to really give this a good kick the tires and make sure everything is safe, and find a win-win for everybody. Bern, really appreciate your time. It would be great to catch up in 6-8 months and see where everything is at.
Great.
Yeah, and I'm going to circle back with you in regards to your association, and hopefully you find some sponsors to really help you with your work.
Yeah, no, I need to circle back when the city council decision is made. This is the second quarter of 20. Circle back, and if we can find the CEO of Tiny Mile, his name is Ignacio. I try to be as neutral as possible, but circle back, and I'd love to be in the same conversation with him, because I mean, it's a shame what happened to him, and it's funny not funny, but it's odd that I say that I would have voted against it as well. At the same time, I'm rooting for him as an entrepreneur. So it's a very unfortunate regulatory twist, that our inability to prepare for technology, and that's not going to go away. We're going to keep seeing this over and over again.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you, Bern. Have a great day.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.
So this concludes the episode of Robotics for All podcast by AV&R. If you don't want to miss another single episode, don't forget to subscribe to our show in your favorite podcast app. Thank you very much, everyone, and we'll talk again soon.